Welcome back to All About Winning Daily Fantasy Sports. My name is Ty Patton. Well, we have sound now, and I just wanted to let you guys know that I originally posted this video, went to check it out, and noticed that there was no sound. Researched the problem and found out that when my computer did a Windows 10 update, it did not restart, which cut off my sound. So I had to go back through all that. I did post a short little video clip letting you guys know that I was going to repost this video, and this time you'll have sound with the same great information. And so it begins. The NFL playoffs are here as the 12-team tournament for the road to the Super Bowl kicks off with the Wildcard weekend featuring 2 games on Saturday and 2 games on Sunday. Saturday kicks off with the 10-6 Buffalo Bills visiting the 10-6 Houston Texans. The Texans are a 2.5-point favorite, and the game total has moved from 41 to 43.5 points. This game kicks off at 4:35 Saturday afternoon. The Saturday evening game features the 9-7 Tennessee Titans visiting the 12-4 New England Patriots. The Patriots originally opened up as a 5.5-point favorite. The line quickly moved to 4.5 points, which is where it's at now, and the game total has went from 42.5 points to 44 points. This game kicks off at 8:15 Saturday night. Sunday kicks off with the 10-6 Minnesota Vikings visiting the 13-3 New Orleans Saints. The Saints opened up as a 7-point favorite, and the line has moved to 8 points, and the game total has rose from 47 to 49.5 points. This game kicks off at 1:05 p.m. Sunday. Closing out the wild card weekend, the 11-5 Seattle Seahawks visit the 9-7 Philadelphia Eagles. Seattle has went from a 1-point up to a 2-point and then back down to a 1.5-point favorite where it's at now, with a game total that has had no movement, sitting at 46 points. Before I walk through this chart with you guys, I wanted to try to explain ceiling and floor because someone had a question last week. First, ceiling is not generated by the most point that a player has scored during a given period, like during the NFL season. Instead, ceiling is generated by an algorithm that is equal to a 15% probability that a player will score at least that many points, and floor is generated by an 85% probability that a player will score at least that many points. A good way to remember this too is floor probabilities are most useful when you are trying to maximize your lineup's total floor for cash games such as 50-50, head-to-head, and double-ups. Ceiling probabilities are used to maximize your lineup's upside for larger GPP tournaments like the Millie Maker on Draftkings. An example from this chart right here, Russell Wilson has a ceiling of 26.83. That's saying there's a 15% chance that he scores at least that many points. That's not saying that's the most he's scored this year or the most that he can score. Obviously, he could score way more than that. But there's a 15% chance based on this mathematical algorithm that he can get to 26.83. Now, likewise, there's an 85% chance that he scores at least 9.64. Now, 9.64 is really low. It's not saying that that's the worst he would score. It's saying that 85% chance he's going to get at least that many points. It's probably going to fall somewhere in between there, but that's how they get the ceiling and floor numbers. It isn't generated by the most points that they've scored in a season and the least amount of points that they've scored in a season. I used to think that years ago and looked at it, and it's a pretty extravagant algorithm that they use, and they actually use like the 5, 10, 15, 20, all the way up to 90% percentile, and they use the 85 percentile as the cutoffs, like 15% for the ceiling and 85% for the floor. So that's how they get those numbers. I just wanted to clear that up in case someone else out there had a question. And by all means, and I always mention this at the end of my videos, if you have a question or a comment, please reach out. If I don't know the answer, I'll find out for you if I can. Or if there's something that you'd like to see, or a different statistic, which I've had people do that, I'll try to implement that as well. This channel is your channel, and without you, this channel doesn't grow. So it matters to me if you have questions or comments. Now to this chart that I've created for the wild card playoffs. It's a 4-game slate, so obviously we don't have the big pool of players to choose from. Um, I've broken it down obviously by quarterbacks, running backs, wide receiver, and tight end, and defensive special teams. For anyone who's new to this channel, first off, welcome. And my colors are obviously yellow is on the players. Yellow is I'm kind of on the fence with them. Green is I'm targeting them. In the categories, the colors represent obviously green is the best, yellow is middle of the road, and red is the worst. And that's for that particular category. That doesn't mean, like you see Drew Brees here is red on the opponent rank. Minnesota has a number 9 ranking versus the quarterback position for the season, and a number 1 for their last 4 games. That doesn't mean Drew Brees is a bad quarterback. It's just for that particular category in comparison to the other players, is that number is worse in comparison. So, and for all these positions, I broke it down obviously by name, team, their salary, and their opponent, excuse me, the opponent rank, and what the opponent's ranking is the last 4 games versus that position, their ownership number, that's a projected ownership number, ceiling and floor, which we just talked about, and some notes. And when I scroll up, you'll obviously be able to pause the video, screenshot it, use this chart how you like, and then I'll be scrolling up from the bottom to as well, long enough for you to pause or screenshot it or do whatever you want with it. So I want to jump right into this. I got a lot of information for you guys. I'll probably skip over the ones in white. Some of them I will address. Some of the ones in the lower categories, I'll just say that I really don't have much interest, and then you can read my notes, and we'll go from there. So quarterbacks kicking off. Number 1, Russell Wilson. He's the most expensive this weekend at $6,800. I have a little bit of interest in Wilson. Philadelphia has a number 15 ranking overall for the season versus the quarterback position, number 13 in the last 4 games. He's got a projected ownership of 14%, which is pretty low in comparison to Brees, Watson, and Wentz. His ceiling is middle of the road, 26.83, and his floor is a 9.64. These teams met in Week 12 with Seattle winning the game 17-9. The biggest difference in that game was that Wilson had Chris Carson and Rashad Penny in that game. He had those 2 running backs as starting running backs, and he still threw 25 passes in that game. I look for 40 or more passes in this game due to the running back situation in Seattle. And the best way to move the ball against Philadelphia is through the air. So I think last week Wilson threw 40 passes. I think he gets there again this week, and that makes him viable anytime and he's a really efficient quarterback. I think there'll be more scoring than that 17-9 score. Seattle's beat up at the running back position, and Philadelphia's beat up at the wide receiver position. So you got 2 teams coming in here with mash units at some key positions. But I will have some exposure to Russell Wilson, and stacking him up with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf and Jacob Hollister would be the way that I would go. Excuse me. Next up is Drew Brees. He's 6,600. Minnesota has number 9 ranking for the season versus quarterback position. In the last 4 games, they have a number 1 ranking. He has a 21% ownership, projected ownership, a ceiling of 33.24, which is the highest on this slate, and his floor is 10.56. Highest implied total of all 4 games of 28.5 points. He will be one of the highest owned, but Minnesota has been bottom 3rd versus the wide receiver positions this year. I like Brees a lot in this game, at home, playoff game. I just have a lot of interest in Brees in this matchup for his receivers. It's kind of odd that they're better against the quarterback than they are the wide receivers. They're a lot harder to run the ball against, but I really like Brees in this position at home. And I generally, and if you've watched any of my previous videos, games that have the highest totals, I do like to target those games. Now, a lot of times the favorite team, I like to target the running game for teams that are, maybe a big spread. They are the biggest favorite on this slate, and it just checks a lot of the boxes for me. There's some really good match. I mean, Michael Thomas is matchup proof, and there's only one way Michael Thomas gets involved, and that's if Drew Brees throws him the ball. So I will have a lot of exposure to Brees. He's, like I said, his ownership's at 21%, so he's not even the highest owned, and I will be using him. Next up, Josh Allen. He's 6,500. Houston has a number 31 ranking overall versus the quarterback position for the season, number 27 their last 4 games. He has a 20% ownership, projected ownership right now, a ceiling of 27.21 and a floor of 10.51. Houston is number 31 versus the quarterback position, and Allen brings a 31.9 rushing yards per game average on top of the passing matchup. He's only $100 cheaper than Brees, and that could make Allen contrarian and a good quarterback to play in like the larger GPPs. If you're $100 less and you're sitting there and you have Drew Brees, or do you want Josh Allen? A lot of people are going to go to Drew Brees. Of course, the projected ownerships only show him 1% less, but I think those numbers will widen out a little bit as we get closer to game time on Saturday, or on Sunday for Brees, Saturday for Allen. I really like Allen in this. You can pass the ball on Houston. J.J. Watt is due back. That, to me, just creates more rushing yards for Josh Allen. If he has to take off, he will definitely do that. I just think this is an overall good matchup for the Bills in this game. Deshaun Watson, I'm not going to be targeting him that much. He's 6,400. This Buffalo defense is legit. They have a number 3 overall ranking versus the quarterback position for the season, number 6 their last 4 games. He's sitting at 21% ownership, and he has a ceiling of 29.39 and a floor of 13.26. This is a difficult matchup versus defense. He might find some room to throw to, I was going to say Fuller, but I just found some information that says it's more than likely that Fuller's going to be out. But Stills doesn't have an injury designation now. So Stills and QT will probably be the ones that get targeted the most. He's going to still try to get the ball to Hopkins, but Hopkins is going to be shadowed by Tre'Davious White for most of the day. I'm not crazy about this matchup for Watson at all. Last year in a game, and we'll cover this when we get down to the wide receivers, he did have a wide receiver that had a really good game, and it wasn't Hopkins. And Hopkins was 57% owned in that game in the Wildcard round, and he only scored 8 fantasy points. They only scored 7 points in that game. This could be a similar game, and because Buffalo's defense this year is better than the Indy defense last year, and that's who shut down Watson and the Texans last year. So I'm not going to have much exposure to him. I'll have some, but very little. Ryan Tannehill, I don't have any interest at all in the Tennessee passing game. He is going against the number 1 defense versus the quarterback, number 14 the last 4 games. He's got a projected ownership of 20%, ceiling of 29.37 and a floor of 18.03. I think that floor is so high because you see a situation where they could get behind, they have to abandon the run, he has to throw a lot, perhaps even garbage points. I know a lot of people have written the Patriots off. I'm by no means a New England Patriots fan, but I am not writing the Patriots off. I'm not doing it. If they get eliminated this weekend and Tennessee puts it on them, I'll live to play next weekend. But I'm not going there right now. And this is a good defense, and this is a very difficult matchup for Tennessee. They want to run the ball, and New England's going to probably sell out to stop them from running, and then they're going to match up their cornerbacks. Gilmore will probably shadow A.J. Brown, and to take him out of the game. And that's what they can do too. They can match up one on man to man, stack the box to stop the run, and then put Tannehill in a situation that he's not accustomed to. He doesn't throw that many passes per game, and in comeback mode, this night is not an ideal situation for Tannehill. And if they get behind, it's probably going to be a really long day for him. I won't have very little exposure to Ryan Tannehill this week. And as I in my notes, you'll see here, it's a very difficult matchup for Tannehill. I believe the Patriots sell out to stop Henry and force Tannehill to throw against their elite corners one-on-one. Carson Wentz for Philadelphia. He's 6,200. Seattle, number 17 versus quarterback position for the season. Number 11, their last 4 games. He has a projected ownership right now of 27, which is the highest projected ownership. Has a ceiling of 23.56 and a floor 12.31. Not sure how this team slipped into the playoffs. Seattle's defense isn't elite, and Wentz should be able to pass to his mash unit of receivers and tight end Goddard. I did see something a few hours ago that said the team doctor was leaning towards Zach Ertz being out. So you have Philadelphia, Wentz throwing to a bunch of, well, his number one receiver is a college quarterback converted to a wide receiver in Greg Ward, and backup tight end Dallas Goedert, who's definitely formidable. And if for some reason Ertz would play in this game, I would probably go to Goddard and think that they're going to be using Ertz as a decoy. He has a lacerated kidney and a broken rib. I'm truly not looking for him to be playing. And Seattle is vulnerable to the tight end position, and Wentz can probably attack that with Goddard. And as I mentioned, I think this game will have more scoring than that first meeting in Week 12. But I think both teams are going to have to try to move the ball through the air. Kirk Cousins from Minnesota. Now, I generally, especially in the playoffs, like to use the quarterbacks from the teams that I think are going to win the games. I do not think Minnesota is going to beat New Orleans. This is the one game, though. It has the highest total, and game script would favor Kirk Cousins. You can move the ball in the air against New Orleans. They're pretty stingy versus the run. New Orleans has a number 21 ranking versus the quarterback position for the season, number 17 their last 4 games. He has really low ownership at 11%, a ceiling of 27.47, a floor of 11.48. Cousins has a good matchup, and the team is healthy. Cook is expected back. Thielen's back. Diggs, Rudolph. Nice pivot off other highly owned quarterbacks. New Orleans is stingy versus the run, and he should have to pass to keep up. So this is a positive game script for their passing game. Tom Brady, 5,800. Last, and to me, certainly not least. Tennessee is number 20 versus the quarterback position for the season, number 23 the last 4 games. He has the lowest ownership on his slate at 10%, ceiling of 20.36 and a floor of 9.98. Lowest owned quarterback on the slate. I will have exposure versus defense. That in their last 9 games, they are number 30 overall, allowing 288.9 passing yards per game. To me, he's still the greatest of all time and very sneaky in this situation. At home, down and out, people were writing him off. Recency bias. They just got beat by Miami. Throw in the towel. New England's done. I'm not going there this weekend. So I will be higher than the field on ownership, and he's one of the main ones that I'm targeting with Breeze. Now, moving down to running backs. I'm going to cover these 2. I don't have much interest in them. Believe it or not, the top 2, Derrick Henry, Tennessee, he's 8,200, most expensive. The NFL rushing title winner. He's going against the number 1 ranked defense versus the running back for the season and the last 4 games. Has one of the highest ownerships at 40%, a ceiling of 35.02, and a floor of 10.8. And if they get him going and New England can't stop him, he's probably going to get to that ceiling. He doesn't do much in the passing game, so it'll be another one of them type games where he needs to punch it in 2 or 3 times on top of his 100 yards. But I don't believe this game script or matchup favors Henry at all. I'm going to have very low ownership compared to the field. I just don't think it's there. As I mentioned with when I talked about Ryan Tannehill, I believe New England's going to stack the box, sell out, put their corners on islands out there against Tennessee's wide receivers, and tell them that Tannehill has to beat them. And believe that. I believe they're going to do everything they can to limit Henry. And as I said, he doesn't get much passes thrown to him out of the backfield. So that limits his opportunities as well. If they would fall behind, you'd probably see a situation where we'd actually see more Dion Lewis. And that wouldn't be good for with Derrick Henry sitting on the sideline. Because if they're behind or not close, and the game's not close, it comes a point where you have to abandon the run to try to keep up. And this defense, I think the Patriots are going to come out fired up. I really do. And that's the way that I'm building my lineups this weekend. Dalvin Cook from from Minnesota, he's 7,800. New Orleans, number 6 versus the running back position for the season, number 13 the last 4 games. He has an ownership of 21%, which is considerably less than Henry. A ceiling of 28.63, a floor 11.97. Road underdog versus a team that is number 6 overall against the running back position. Question mark. That's something that I don't like underdog running backs, especially underdogs that are significant, more than a touchdown. Low ownership makes him worth a look, and then you still have to wonder, is he really healthy? And the game script that has to favor him is a low scoring, close, or even in the lead, that type. And I just think with their pass defense, Breeze is going to be able to push the ball and move the ball on them at will. And I just don't think this is a good matchup for Cook at all. He does get targeted out of the backfield, but so he could probably pick up some points that way. And I would probably prefer Cook over Henry, but right now I'm not getting to either one of them. Alvin Kamara, New Orleans, he's 7,400. And Minnesota's number 14 versus the running back position for the season. Number 26, their last 4 games. He has an ownership of 41%, ceiling of 22.64, and a floor of 11.29. I really like Kamara in this matchup. I'm not crazy about the ownership, but I feel like I can gain leverage in other areas. He's getting 18 touches per game during the season. He could be getting more in the playoffs. He does get a lot of work in the passing game. This creates problems for Minnesota, matchup problems, and I like Alvin Kamara a lot. I like him more than Henry or Cook, even though his volume could be less. The game script would definitely favor him. Now, if their defense scored a touchdown or two and something happened, they got a real big lead through other means, then you could see him get phased out a little bit. But I really like Kamara, and I even like stacking him with Drew Brees because of the passing game upside that he brings. Excuse me. Miles Sanders from Philadelphia, 6,200. Seattle's number 19 versus the running back position for the season, number 28 the last 4. He has the highest ownership on the slate right now at 47%. I think that's probably due to his salary. Ceiling is 26.31 and his floor is 6.27. He suffered an ankle injury in the game versus the Giants, and Boston Scott filled in admirably for him. He's expected to play, but keep an eye on the injury reports, and he has the highest projected ownership right now. I'm kind of on the fence with him. I know that ideally Philly like to use him and win this game that way. But I think they're going to be forced to the air. Seattle's not a super elite defense, but you definitely want to. And with the game that Boston Scott had, are they going to be willing to split the carries, but the touches between the two? That's kind of concerning too. I mean, you need 18 points out of him to get the lowest value. And I just, with him at 6,200 and the next running back that I'm going to talk about is 200 less, I think I'd prefer to get to him. And that's Devin Singletary. He's 6,000 for Buffalo. Houston has a number 27 ranking versus the running back position. For the season, number 25 the last 4 games. He has an ownership of 25%, which isn't extremely high for a 4 game slate. A ceiling of 18.7 and a floor of 6.38. One of my favorite running backs in the wild card round. Houston is number 29, allowing 120.6 rushing yards per game in their last 9 games. He's getting the majority of the touches for Buffalo in a positive game script. I really like Singletary and stacking him with their defense, even stacking him with the tight end Knox. I think he gets a lot of targets out of the backfield. In Week 16, he got all the touches. Week 17, it was Frank Gore, and they rested Singletary for the playoffs. So I really like Singletary. Kamara and Singletary are my favorites right now. Boston Scott for Philadelphia. He's got 4% ownership, ceiling of 20.98 and a floor of 0. Because if Sanders is healthy, he could very well be on his way to a 0. Sanders is expected to play. Coming off a huge, Boston Scott's coming off a huge 3 TD game versus the Giants. Would be interested if Sanders is out or limited, but it is riskier if there's something that they're going to be splitting the workload. James White from New England, 5,700. Tennessee, number 20 versus the running back position, number 23 their last 4. 30% ownership, ceiling of 22.63 and a floor of 4.49. I will have White stacked with the lineups that I'm using Brady. He gets a lot of targets out of the backfield, and the one discouraging thing about him is he's only had 1 game over 16 fantasy points, which is where you need to get at his salary. You need to get just a little bit more than 16. But he does get a lot of targets out of the backfield, and Tennessee has had problems with that this year. And as I said, I like Brady a lot this week, and stacking him up with pieces of the New England. I think New England's going to come out and probably be angry after what happened. Passed up a really good opportunity last week by losing to Miami. If they'd have won that game, they wouldn't be playing this weekend. They'd be enjoying a bye and getting healthy. But I look for White to be involved a lot in this game, and I'll have a lot of exposure to him, especially with Brady. Travis Homer from Seattle, not a good matchup at all. I expect Lynch to get more carries with Homer getting some third down. Homer should get some third down passing work. I don't have much interest here. He's got an projected ownership at 3%. He did get some carries last week in Lynch's first game, but I think a lot of those carries are going to go to Lynch this week. Marshawn Lynch is next. He's 5,200. I don't have a whole lot of interest in him either. This isn't a good matchup versus the Philly run defense. I think Wilson's going to be putting the ball in the air against Philadelphia's pass defense. He might vulture a touchdown from a yard out. They were going to actually bring him in last week, give him a chance at a second touchdown until that. I don't know what happened with that delay a game on third down. Actually ended up costing them the game, and therefore Seattle's on the road instead of being home enjoying a bye, or at least being home to play a game. So I don't have much interest in the Seattle running backs at all this time around. Chris Carson and Rashad Penny, it'd be a different story. Carlos Hyde from Houston, he's 5,100. He has 11% projected ownership, 15.11 ceiling, 3.57 floor. The Bills do allow more production versus the running back, but I don't think game script is going to favor Houston trying to pound this defense and run the ball. I don't see Carlos Hyde being a big part of this game. So I won't have much exposure to him, if any at all. Latavius Murray in New Orleans, he's 5,000. His projected ownership is 7%, 25.56 ceiling with a 0 floor. That's a big gap. I do have interest in the Saints running game, and this could be a pivot away from the ownership going to Breeze and Thomas. He could vulture a touchdown or two, and if they build a lead and their defense is putting it on the Vikings, he could be a nice pivot. It'd be risky, it'd be contrarian, put him and Kamara together and pivot away from Breeze and Thomas. Jordan Howard, Philadelphia, 4,900. He was healthy last week, but I'm not going there with Sanders and now Boston Scott in the mix. I don't have any interest, and I don't think that this game script's going to favor, especially when you have three running backs in a committee, going to favor one particular running back in this playoff game. Sony Michel, New England, he's 4,600. I do have a little bit of interest in him. That's why I have him marked in yellow. New England, Tennessee is number 20 versus running back position. Number 23 in their last 4 games. 15% projected ownership, 14.69 ceiling, and a 3.49 floor. I like Michelle at this price. It doesn't take much for value, fairly low ownership, and Tennessee can be run on. And I like home favorites and the home favorite running backs. Those are the running backs that I target a lot. I think he's going to go overlooked and under-owned. And at 4,600, like I said, it doesn't take much for him to get to his value. So I will have some exposure to him. And I might actually pivot off of James White to Michelle. Rex Burkhead, always in the mix, but not sure I get here with Michelle or White unless Michelle or White is ruled out. Duke Johnson, Houston, 4,400. I actually meant to have him in yellow because in a game script of Buffalo being in the lead, that would phase out Carlos Hyde. Buffalo, as I mentioned, has the number 12 ranking versus the running back position, number 10 their last 4. He's only got 6% projected ownership, has a ceiling of 16.65 and a floor of 4.07. He gets a lot of targets out of the backfield, which that's what makes me like him more than Hyde. And due to the game script, the way that I think the game will go, if they're playing from behind or in a close game, that would be a positive for them to use Duke Johnson and use him like they did against the Patriots when they beat the Patriots and he had that big game. Deion Lewis, Tennessee, 4,200. Would be viable with the game script of the Titans playing from behind, which I think is very possible. He gets work in the passing game, and I just don't think he gets there in volume and 4,200. So I won't have much or any of Deion Lewis. Right now, he's got a projected ownership of 9%, so that's interesting. Frank Gore, Buffalo, 4,100. As I mentioned for Singletary, I really like Singletary. He's getting the majority of the work. Wouldn't be surprised if they let Gore come in and vulture a touchdown if they got down there like that. But I just don't think he's going to get enough touches to make him usable. He does have a projected ownership of 2%, which would make him extremely contrarian. But I'm just not going there on a 4-game slate. I don't think I have to go that low to find value. Okay, I'm going to scroll up here to wide receivers, and that'll bring. I'll have to go down to. I'll bring in tight ends and defense special teams together. Wide receivers: Michael Thomas, 9,300. Minnesota number 26 versus the wide receiver position, number 21 their last 4. He has a projected ownership right now of 81%. His ceiling is 35.47. His floor is 17.41. 81% ownership is not going to scare me away. I'm going to lock in the points in this great matchup and find leverage elsewhere. Sign me up. That's my note. That's what I'm doing. I'll be probably right along with that 80%, and I'll as I said, I'll find leverage elsewhere. I think it's safe that he's going to get value. Value's 28 points. I think he gets there. And might even approach the ceiling if Minnesota keeps this game real competitive. He could have a phenomenal game because there's nobody on Minnesota's teams that's going to stop him. He does have a little bit of a hand issue. Had a question mark. I don't know if that's more gamemanship by the Saints, but I'm going to have exposure to Michael Thomas. So. DeAndre Hopkins, 7,700 for Houston. Buffalo's number 6 versus the wide receiver for the season. Number 6 their last 4, so a really consistent team. Has 33% ownership, a ceiling of 27.22 and a floor of 13.75. This is an example of floor too, because last year, and I mentioned this I don't like this matchup at all for Hopkins versus Tre'Davious White from Buffalo. In last year's wild card game, Hopkins went into the game with a 57% ownership and ended up with 5 receptions for 37 yards and 0 TDs. That equals 8 fantasy points. There were a lot of people upset. Now, there was another wide receiver that did well for Houston, and we'll talk about him in a minute. But I just think this matchup here is not good at all for Hopkins and Tre'Davious White. I mean, I'm sure that Watson's going to try to go to him, but I don't think it's going to be a big game for him. I don't see him approaching that ceiling. So I'm not going to have much exposure to him at all, especially at 7,700. It's lower than where he's been at most of the time this year, but I'm just not getting drawn into that. I can go elsewhere and find value. Likewise for A.J. Brown from Tennessee, he's 7,400. He's going against the number 1 ranked defense for his wide receiver position. They've been number 17 their last 4. They've been struggling their last 4. I admit that. Patriots have looked awful. Recency bias is going to have probably a lot of people interested in a lot of Tennessee players. He has a ownership of 32% right now, ceiling at 27.97 and a floor of 7.19. Brown is going to be shadowed all day by Gilmore as the Patriots sell out to stop Derrick Henry. I'll be under the field on ownership. This guy is a beast, but so isn't Gilmore. And I just think the Patriots game plan is going to be stack the box, take away Henry. We make Tannehill beat us. We're going to put Gilmore out there on A.J. Brown and match up man on man. And I think that Tannehill will make some mistakes in this game, and New England's defense I actually think will be involved in this game as well. Tyler Lockett from Seattle. I have a lot of interest in Lockett this week, especially stacking up with Russell Wilson. He's 7,200. Philadelphia is number 29 versus the wide receiver position for the season, number 27 their last 4. Has 15% ownership, which is low for a 4-game slate, 27.41 ceiling, and a floor of 1.85. I like Lockett here in this matchup. He had 4 receptions, 120 yards in last year's wild card game against Dallas that they lost. Seattle may have to rely on Wilson in the passing game here due to the running back situation, so I really like Tyler Lockett this week. Stephon Diggs from Minnesota, he's 6,600. New Orleans, number 27 versus wide receiver position, number 29 their last 4. He has an ownership of only 12%, ceiling of 30.07 and a floor of 6.27. This is a good matchup for Diggs, even against Lattimore. Lattimore isn't unbeatable. To me, he's not one of the premier shutdown corners. Positive game script, which would be them playing from behind, would favor the Vikings passing game. And in their last 3 games against New Orleans, he has scored 30, 28, and 27 points. So he's been able to put it on New Orleans. And in this, as I said, in this game script, I see a situation where the Vikings are going to be throwing the ball around. This game could potentially really shoot out. Next up, excuse me, I gotta get a drink. Julian Edelman from New England, he's 6,500. Tennessee, number 17 versus wide receiver position, number 16 their last 4. Has an ownership of 15%, ceiling at 23.9, a floor of 8.74. I like stacking Edelman with Brady as and as I mentioned about the other players, recency bias has everyone writing off the Patriots. Low ownership and a good matchup. I have a lot of interest here, and I'll have a lot of exposure to Julian Edelman. Adam Thielen from Minnesota, he's 6,200. As I mentioned for Diggs, New Orleans, number 27 versus wide receiver for the season, number 29 their last 4. He actually has higher ownership than Diggs, and I think that's because of the Lattimore being on Diggs' fear. So he's at projected ownership of 19%, 21.99 ceiling, and a 1.49 floor. A little cheaper than Diggs and higher ownership. And he's averaged 22 fantasy points per game versus the Patriots in the last 3. And positive game script, I don't feel you can go wrong with having exposure to either one of them. And I actually like them as part of game stacks with the Patriots and bringing it back with one of those receivers. DK Metcalf, Seattle, he's 6,100. Philadelphia number 29 versus the wide receiver position, number 27 their last four. He has 22% projected ownership, ceiling of 20.77 and a floor of 5.45. I like the Seattle receivers stacked with Wilson in a game that Wilson may have to put the ball in the air, 40 or more times, similar to the San Francisco game, lack of running game. I like DK Metcalf in this game. John Brown in Buffalo, I have him highlighted in yellow. I have a little bit of interest because of the matchup. Houston's number 21 versus the wide receiver, number 20, their last four. He's got really low ownership, which makes him interesting, and with projected ownership of 10. Ceiling of 23.29 and a floor of 6.59. Brown has a favorable matchup versus the Houston pass defense. Stack him in lineups with Allen. I'm just worried about the game script, which could favor the Buffalo running game and the Buffalo defense, and they might not have to throw that much. I would stack him with Allen, but I wouldn't stack him with Singletary. I don't think they both go off in this game. Cole Beasley, I didn't have much interest in Beasley. He does have low ownership, and he could get a lot of targets underneath, and especially get targeted a ton if Buffalo can't get Singletary going, or if they fall behind. He could have a really big game in this matchup. But I'm not going there. I don't believe that's how the game's going to go. I'm more interested in the Singletary and the Bills defense. So I have a little bit of exposure to Brown in some stacks with Allen, and not so much with Beasley. Greg Ward from Philadelphia, I got him in green. I'm going to be targeting him a lot. He's 5,200. Seattle is number 20 versus the wide receiver position, number 19 their last four. He's got the second highest ownership on the slate at 42%, 15.22 ceiling, and a 4.75 floor. This is the number one wide receiver for Wentz in a good matchup at home. Small home underdog. I do like wide receivers that are in those positions. Could be playing from behind and get a ton of targets. I like that, and I'll be targeting Greg Ward a lot. Fuller from Houston, he's 4,900. He's got a projected ownership of 16. If he was playing, I'd be really interested in him, but I did just see the notes. He's been limited all week. They're leaning more towards him being out. As I said here, I like Fuller due to the Hopkins matchup. Very concerned with injury and how healthy he will be. So I'm thinking he's not going to play. So we'll just go to the next receiver, which is Kenny Stills from the same team. Buffalo number 6 versus the pass. Number 6 their last four. He has a projected ownership of 11%, ceiling of 14.97 and a floor of 3.37. Now, if Fuller's out and Stills is playing, I really like Stills in this matchup because Hopkins is going to be getting the Tre'Davious White treatment, which should open things up for Stills, Kuti, and perhaps the tight end position. So I will have some Kenny Stills in my lineups, and as I said, I think Will Fuller will be out. And if Fuller's in, he's still risky. I mean, he runs a couple plays and he goes out. You definitely don't want a zero. So Stills doesn't have an injury designation, and I'll be filling him in with some lineups where I have Singletary, and I like Singletary with Knox and bringing it back with a wide receiver from Houston, preferably the number 2 or number 3. I'm not going to have much of DeAndre Hopkins, if any at all. N'Keal Harry from New England, he's 4,100. He has actually stepped into the number 3 position ahead of Dorsett. Tennessee number 17 versus wide receiver, number 16 their last four. He's got 10% ownership. Excuse me. 9.18 ceiling and 2.08 floor. He's as I mentioned, past Dorsett on the depth chart as the number 3 behind Edelman and Sanu. Could be a sneaky option stack with Brady. You're going to hear this in the next few positions too. You just never know with New England. It could be a tackle that gets a touchdown. It could be 3 touchdowns to Ben Watson. It could be a big game for Brandon Bolt. You just never know. But I will. I'll have some of Harry stacks with Brady. I wouldn't necessarily run him out there as a one-off, but I'll have some of him at that price. Traquan Smith from New Orleans, Minnesota, as I mentioned, 26 versus wide receiver number 21. Their last four, he's got 2% ownership, 11.97 ceiling, 2.31 floor. Not sure there's going to be enough targets to spread around in this game, especially if New Orleans builds a lead. There's a lot of mouths to feed in this lineup. He'd be like a GPP flyer only. Mohamed Sanu from New England, 3,900. I have a little bit of interest in Sanu. Stacks with Brady. Tennessee, number 17 versus wide receiver, number 16. Their last four has 18% projected ownership. 12.27 ceiling, 0 floor. He's the number 2 behind Edelman in a good matchup. Actually has higher ownership than Edelman, probably due to his price. I'll have some exposures in stacks with Brady. Corey Davis from Tennessee, 6% projected ownership. I just don't have much interest in the Tennessee offensive players at all this week. The next wide receiver for them, I do have a little bit of interest, Tajay Sharp. He would be the receiver that would probably benefit from the matchups that are going to go to Brown and Davis. Sharp out of the be running out of the slot at 3,800. He's got 2% ownership, ceiling of 13.39, floor of 0.31. I actually like Sharp more than Brown and Davis, as I mentioned. He had 5 receptions for 69 yards and 2 touchdowns in a game in Week 16 versus New Orleans. He could be very sneaky in the positive game script where they're coming from behind, and Tannehill, his targets are limited, and this could be where they're going to funnel the targets to. Ted Ginn Jr., New Orleans, has projected 6% ownership, 7.68 ceiling, and a 0.72 floor. He's only had 4 targets in the last 3 games. It makes him a sneaky pivot off an 81% owned Thomas. Great matchup, just another sneaky option in a GPP, probably a GPP only play. Olabisi Johnson from Minnesota, 3,500. 1% ownership, 6.29 ceiling, 3.31 floor. I just not really interested. Limited volume, could be viable in the game script. I'm sorry. Where are we? Oh, excuse me. He's the number 3 behind Diggs and Thielen, not to mention that the volume that Cook could possibly get, which is going to limit even more opportunities. Just not enough volume. The matchup is good, and the game script's probably going to favor, but I just don't have much interest in Johnson this week. David Moore, Seattle, 3,400. Another part of the Seattle passing game and a very good matchup versus the Phillies secondary. Low ownership, GPP, dart throw. DeAndre Carter from Houston. Not if Steels and Fuller were both out, I might go there. Had 7 targets in Week 17 versus Tennessee, but they were resting a lot of their players later on in that game. JJ Arcega-Whiteside from Philly. A lot of value on this slate. I don't think I have to go there. He is the number 2 and would be usable in the game script of a shootout or them playing from behind. Has lower than 1% ownership. Just don't think that I have to go this low. Kiki Kuti from Houston. Buffalo, number 6 versus wide receiver, number 6, their last 4. He's got 5% ownership, ceiling of 17 and a floor of 0.64. If Fuller is out, he becomes a very interesting option as the number 3 behind Hopkins and Stills. He had a huge game last year in last year's Wildcard game in a similar situation versus Indianapolis, and Indianapolis came in and beat Houston 21-7. They only scored 7 points, but he had 11 receptions on 14 targets for 110 yards and 1 TD, and only scored 7. And they only scored 7 points. This could be a similar option. They take Hopkins out with White and limit Stills. This could be the game for QT or Stills. I like one of those two in I don't think they're going to score much against Buffalo, but someone's going to get targeted, and it could very well be Kuti at 3,300. Doesn't take much for him to get value. Philip Dorsett, he's been passed on the depth chart by N'Keal Harry. He's now the number 4. He's got a projected ownership of 4%, ceiling of 12.88 and a floor 2.18. You just never know who New England's going to use to gain a matchup advantage. And as I said, he's been passed on the depth chart by N'Keal Harry. Jacoby Myers, New England, see Philip Dorsett. He's got 3% projected ownership, another GPP dart throw. Laquan Treadwell from Minnesota, 3,000. I just don't have any interest. And Robert Foster from Buffalo, 3,000. I don't have any interest. Okay, I'm going to scroll up here and bring up the tight ends, and now you can see the tight ends and defensive special teams. Tight ends, Zach Ertz is 6,000. Team Doctor has stated that he thinks Zach Ertz is unlikely to play in wildcard game versus Seattle. You can monitor, but I would temper my expectations even if he's active. He has a lacerated kidney and it's lacerated kidney or spleen. I don't want to get that wrong. He has another injury other than a broken rib. But they're saying that they doubt whether he's going to play. It'll be Dallas Goedert who's next. He's 5,200. Seattle gives it up to the tight end. They're number 30 for the season, number 17 their last 4. He has the highest projected ownership at 46%, a ceiling of 16.81, a floor of 7.51. He's the highest owned tight end right now. Wentz's options are limited. Seattle is vulnerable to the tight end. I definitely have interest. He checks off a lot of the boxes. He's going to be high owned. So I will have some exposure to him. Jared Cook from New Orleans, he's 4,900. Minnesota's number 7 versus the tight end for the season, number 2 their last 4. He has a 20% projected ownership, 19.74 ceiling, 10.36 floor. He's had 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games. He does a lot with low volume targets. Minnesota does defend the tight end well. Ownership could go up, I think, if Ertz is officially ruled out. Jacob Hollister for Seattle, he's 4,300. Philadelphia's number 5 versus the tight end, number 5 their last 4. 15% ownership, ceiling of 15.18, floor 3.6. Matchup versus Philly isn't great, but I do like stacking Hollister with Wilson. Could be sneaky if the game shoots out. He's a nice pivot off the higher owned Goddard and Cook. Janu Smith of Tennessee, 3,800. New England, number 9 versus the tight end for the season, number 21, their last 4. Has 10% projected ownership, 15.41 ceiling, and a 2.19 floor. He could get a lot of targets if New England is able to shut down Henry and build a lead and force that type of positive game script to the Tennessee passing game. Wide receiver matchups force targets to the tight end. And last week, Gesicki from Miami did have 13.4 fantasy points versus New England. Kyle Rudolph from Minnesota, he's 3,500. New Orleans, number 10 versus the tight end, number 12 their last 4. Has 17% projected ownership, of ceiling of 16.57, floor 4.25. Game script, playing from behind, could increase targets for Rudolph, especially with the Saints putting pressure on Cousins. Take away his time to throw, and he might have to dump off more to his check down to his running backs and his tight ends. Darren Fells, Houston, 3,000. Buffalo's number 2 versus the tight end, number 20 their last 4. He has 7% projected ownership, a ceiling of 13.89 and a floor 0.93. He could be real busy in this game due to the wide receiver matchups causing problems for Watson. If they're able to shut down the wide receivers and funnel the targets to the tight ends and potentially Duke Johnson, you could see Fells getting a lot of targets. And Watson does look for him when they're down near the goal line, him and Atkins. So they're pretty stingy versus the tight end, but I wouldn't totally rule him out. Dawson Knox at 2,900. Houston, number 23 versus the tight end, number 30 their last 4. He has 0% ownership, projected ownership right now. He has a ceiling of 7.86 and a floor of 1.58. His 0% projected ownership from the site I use, I don't think it's updated because he didn't play last week. He was just held out as a coach's decision. I really like Knox in this matchup as a spin down option. Doesn't take much to hit value. Houston has been number 30 versus a tight end their last 4 games. I like stacking him with Singletary in this game. Joshua Perkins, Philadelphia, 2,900. Um, Projected ownership at 2%, 8.77 ceiling, floor of 0. If Ertz is out, Perkins will be in the game for their 2 tight end sets, which Philadelphia does that a lot. He's had 5, 2, and 6 targets in his last 3 games. Could be pretty sneaky. Tyler Croft from Buffalo, 2,800. 4 targets last week versus the Jets, but that's because Knox didn't play due to a coach's decision. I'm just not going here with Croft. Irv Smith from Minnesota, he's 2,700. He has 3% projected ownership, 9.65 ceiling, and a 2.91 floor. He's an interesting pivot away from Rudolph. He does get targeted in the red zone, and he averages 3.4 targets a game. So he's sneaky at that price. It doesn't take much for them to pay off. A touchdown would pay it off. And in this positive game script of them, if they're playing from behind, you could see Irv Smith get involved. Ben Watson from New England, 2,700. Tennessee's number 27 versus a tight end, number 22, their last 4. 3% projected ownership, ceiling is 6.04, a floor of 1.26. Risky, but as I mentioned with other New England players, you never know. Tennessee is vulnerable to the tight end, and this could be the game where they're going to go to Watson, and he gets 2 touchdowns, and I mean that would really be a value, something like that. And that's the things that you have to factor in with New England. You just never know where they're going to come from. Matt Lacoste from New England, same situation. He doesn't get targeted as much as Watson. Neither one of them get a whole lot of targets, and he's very risky. But as I put C Watson above, and ask Anthony Fursker from Tennessee's 2,500. I just don't have any interest in Fursker in this game versus Buffalo with Janu Smith on the field. Okay, now we're going to go down here to the defensive special teams. Patriots are the most expensive this week, 3,400. They're getting 2.9 sacks per game. They're allowing 12.2 points per game, 11.2. Their ceiling is 11.2. Their floor is 9.6. They have a projected ownership right now of 22%. And in my note above here, I'd like to target defenses that I think will win the game, especially defenses at home. This is a good matchup for the New England defense at home. If they put Tennessee in the comeback mode, this could put Tannehill in a bad situation. I will have some exposure to the Patriots. Bills, 3,100. They're averaging 2.8 sacks per game. They're giving up 15.7 points per game. Have a ceiling of 10.93, a floor of 8.07. Projected ownership of 14%. Second highest owned defenses in a good matchup versus the Texans. I like the Bills in this spot a lot. And Watson has had 7 turnovers in his last 5 games. So he can turn the ball over, and he does take sacks, a lot of sacks as well. Saints are 3,000. They're averaging 3.1 sacks per game, most on this slate. They allow 21.3 points per game, have a ceiling of 10.2, a floor 9.6. Ownership of 11. Game script could favor the Saints D if the Vikings have to abandon the run game and force the Cousins to the air. They will bring the pressure at home. And I like teams that are big favorites because that means the other team's going to be playing from behind, and there's only really one way you can play from behind, and that's to throw the ball. And if you're in the throw the ball situation, all kinds of things can go wrong. Sack fumble, pick six, just all kinds of and that's where you can generate your defensive points. Eagles are 2,900. They're averaging 2.6 sacks per game. They allow 22.1 points per game, ceiling of 11.03 and a floor of 8.17. 13% ownership. Could be interesting pivot off of higher owned defenses, but Wilson doesn't turn the ball over much. Seahawks, they're 2,800. They average 1.7 sacks per game, 23 points allowed per game, 11.4 ceiling, 8.2 floor. and a projected ownership of 7%. The Seahawks don't get much pressure on the quarterback, but they could be sneaky if the Eagles are forced to throw the ball and come from behind. Texans, 2,600. They get 2 sacks per game, allow 23.6 points per game. They got a ceiling 11.2, a floor of 9.6, and an ownership of 5%. J.J. Watt is back, and I expect the Texans to come after Allen, but he is not afraid to take off running, and that's something that could boost the Texans or the numbers for Allen. If they come after him, he probably will rack up some rushing yards in this game. Titans are 2,400. They get 2.6 sacks per game, allow 20.7 points per game, 12.24 ceiling, which is actually the highest ceiling, and that's interesting. A floor of 8.16, ownership of 13%. This would be a GPP option type defense, really risky. I won't have much ownership with the Titans. That's a spin down, so you can spend up in other areas option. And Vikings are 2,200. They get 3 sacks per game, allow 18.8 points per game, have a ceiling of 10.6 and a floor of 8.8. Ownership is 12%. The Vikings will bring pressure, but this is Drew Brees at home in the playoffs. I don't have much interest in this defensive option. So my main defenses that I'm going to be targeting are the Patriots, Bills, and Saints, and I have a little bit of interest in the Seahawks. I just don't like that they don't get much pressure on the quarterback. So I'm going to scroll back up here, and we're done with the chart. And what I want to do now is go to the Draftkings site and show you a manual lineup that I've built utilizing that player pool that we just went over. So this is a lineup that I'm working on. This is a lineup that I'm going to be using in a large GPP. I like Brady. I like Singletary. I like James White. I like Edelman stacked with Brady. I like Michael Thomas. I like Greg Ward. I like Dawson Knox. And I had Fuller, but I'm going to go to Stills. And I'm going to use the Buffalo Bills defense. And I could probably also use, but if I got Brady, White, and Edelman, I could potentially put the Patriots defense. I just have 900 left. In a 4-game slate, it's not a bad thing to leave money on the table. But I have Brady with White and Edelman stacked up. I got Singletary and Knox, bringing it back with Kenny Stills from Houston, and I and a piece of the passing game from the Philadelphia-Seattle game. I really like this lineup a lot, and I don't MME, meaning I don't play 150 lineups. Not because I have anything against anybody that does, because if I could, I would. If I'm ever in the position, I'm going to do it. It just makes sense. But I play different. Like I might play the 20 entry $1, the 20 entry quarters, the $12 single entry, the Millie Maker, a couple of those, $27 top 40 get 1,000. I'll play those type and spread it out, and then I'll just make different. This is going to be one of my core lineups, and then I'll just move pieces in and out that I like. So that's the manual lineup that I'm working on as one of my core lineups. And what I always do, whether it's for main slate, a showdown, is I always use an optimizer that I have from a paid site that I use. And I've reached out to them and asked them if I could use their name during my videos, and haven't heard anything back. As soon as I do that, I just want to make sure everything is on the up and up. But I use this optimizer. The number one reason I do it is I want to see the different randomizations of the players that I like. So I take all the players that I just showed you on that chart. That's my player pool. And I put a few rules in there, like if I want, if my quarterback is Drew Brees. I want Michael Thomas with him. Josh Allen, I want John Brown. And then I might say stack my quarterback with that at least two of wide receiver, between the wide receiver and tight end. And I'll put that I want a 4-game slate. I put that I wanted at least 2 unique players. And I always set it for 150 lineups. Now, it doesn't always give me 150 because of I set some of the exposure limits, like my highest exposure this weekend was to Michael Thomas, and I did set it at 80%. Not sure that I got 80%, but anyhow, I set it for 150 lineups, and it was with the exposures and the rules and things that I had, it was able to generate 120 lineups. Now, what I'll tell you about that real quick is during the season I did this and using my player pool, and I always use the Draftkings Millie Maker as my measuring stick. Well, 5 times this year, my player pool, you could have generated a lineup from that player pool to outscore the eventual winner of the Draftkings Millie Maker. I didn't do it. My smile would be much different than it is now if I had done it just once. But those players and those winning lineups were also generated in the optimizer. So at 5 times, that doesn't sound like much, but in a 17 week season, 5 times, and in a Millie Maker, that's $5 million, obviously. But and that's why, guys, MME, mass multi-entry, and like I said, if I'm ever in the position to do it, I'll do it. It makes sense. But my main reason, because of the way that I build, is I do want to see the different randomizations. And if I'm doing everything manual, I'm not going to see different combinations of the players that I like. So as I always do, I always share at least 1, maybe 2. I'm going to give you guys 2 this week that was generated from the optimizer using that player pool. And here's the first one. It was Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara, Singletary, and this was interesting, but he was in the player pool. Where is he at? Kiki Kuti, another interesting one. Tajay Sharp, and that allows you to also get Michael Thomas. Tight end was Knox. Wide receiver was Tyler Lockett. And the defense was the Patriots D. Left $100 on the table. It's really interesting. A lot of people might say, Breeze and Kamara and Thomas. Well, let me tell you, last year's optimal lineup in the Wildcard round had Dak Prescott, Zeke Elliott, and Amari Cooper. They were in the optimal lineup, and it didn't have any players from Seattle when they beat Seattle in the Wildcard game. So I do go back and research the years previous too, and I look at the different combinations and how they correlate. So, but this was generated by the optimizer, and I'll give you one more that was generated by the optimizer. It's pretty interesting too. It had Tom Brady, Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara was popping a lot. It had Sony Michel. Had wide receiver John Brown. Edelman to stack with Brady. It had Fuller, but I'm thinking that he's going to be out, so we're going to put Stills. It had tight end Cook. It had Adam Thielen. And it had the Bills defense. Excuse me. Now, this one left 900 on the table. You got the Brady, Michelle, Edelman stack going with, you got Kamara and Cook and bringing it back with Thielen. So that's pretty interesting. Bills defense with Houston wide receiver. So that's a pretty interesting lineup. Left 900 on the table, as I said, on a 4-game slate. That's never a bad thing. So I'm going to try to repost this video. Hopefully get the sound edition. I want to thank you guys for joining me, and I encourage you to please drop any opinions or comments that you may have. I'm the person that reached out to me last week about the ceiling and floor. Hopefully, explain that a little bit better, and to anyone else who might not have known, hopefully that helps you out too. So definitely, if you have any questions, if I don't know the answer, I'll try to find out. I encourage you to please like this video, share it, subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and hit that notification bell. My viewership has really went up, and I really like to see those viewers become subscribers. It doesn't cost anything, and I got really good information, and it's free. And so I have, you can hit that notification bell, get notified when my next videos post. I'll be with you through the playoffs. This channel has grown beyond my expectations. I'm knocking on the door at 100 subscribers, which may not sound much, but it's definitely more than I thought I would be at in my first year doing this, and I'm planning on making this channel grow and being even bigger next year, and maybe even tackling things like the NBA and Major League Baseball. I'm really interested in daily fantasy sports and doing the fantasy analyst part of it. And my channel only grows with you guys, and I really appreciate you taking the time and joining my channel. I will have showdown videos for this weekend. I'll be posting 2 tomorrow for the Houston Buffalo game Saturday and the New England Tennessee game. And then on Saturday, I'll post the 2 videos for Sunday, which will be Minnesota at New Orleans and Seattle at Philadelphia. So I'll have the 4 showdown slates as well, and do the same thing next weekend. It'll be another 4-game slate in the divisional round. You can also follow me on Twitter at winningabout. Don't forget the injury reports. I'll mention this again tomorrow when I do my showdown video. Don't forget your injury reports. You got 2 days Saturday. Make sure you check the injury report around 3 o'clock, because the first game kicks off at 4:30. And then the second game, you want to check that injury report around 6:45, the New England, Tennessee. And then Sunday, you want to check the injury report at 11:30, and then again at around 3 o'clock. Even if the player doesn't have a designation, you still want to check it. I used this example a few weeks ago in a Sunday night game. Last second, Robert Woods was ruled out and didn't have any designation, and so if you weren't on top of that or watching it, and you had Robert Woods in there, you got a nice big 0 to go with it. Again, thank you guys for joining me. I hope this gives you some value. A couple people reached out to me and told me that my player pool actually helped them win some money in the last couple of weeks. That's fantastic. That's what I like to hear. And I just want to know that I'm helping people. I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Have a good evening and take care.